Gear and filmmaking go hand in hand like Elon Musk and controversies.
Go f yourself.
And the one thing that you can usually count on when it comes to film gear is that it's going to be ridiculously overpriced. Like how these tiny pieces of rubber for mounting lav mics somehow cost $75 each. The manufacturers seem to know that we'll pay almost anything to solve our creative challenges. But luckily there are some incredibly useful pieces of gear out there that were never marketed specifically to the film industry, and so they've escaped the insane markups that filmmakers are used to seeing. So in this video, I'm going to go into 8 everyday items that pro filmmakers love to keep in their kit that cost less than 20 bucks and will make your life on set so much easier. I'm going to start off with a little story here, just to give you some context for my love of finding unorthodox solutions to unexpected filmmaking challenges. 3 or 4 years ago, I was hired by Vice, RIP Vice, to fly to the Great Rift Valley in Kenya to film a documentary about bats and the role they might play in future pandemics. Apart from the fact that I don't love working in dark 10-meter underground caves and it was incredibly hot trying to shoot with a 20-pound cinema rig while wearing a hazmat suit, it was a pretty cool job. Everything was going smoothly until on day 4 of the shoot, the director asked me to find a way to rig up a snorri cam POV shot on the lead bat scientist for kind of a unique perspective on what it was like to move through a cave. And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, a snorri cam is that fixed camera angle pointing back at the character that Requiem for a Dream used so well. That was a great idea and I really wanted to make it happen, but the problem was we didn't actually have a snorri cam, which is normally done with like this pretty chunky vest rig thing, and we were in the middle of nowhere, so there was nothing to rent. So I got on YouTube and I started looking for DIY solutions to see if any of them were possible with the gear I had with me. Long story short, I figured out that if I combined 2 belts, some paracord, and a really cheap travel tripod, I could actually get a really decent poor man's snorri cam shot. I think the shot turned out great, and it did make it into the final edit. But for me, the real satisfaction came from working out the answer to the problem in the field. It's just a lot of fun. And that's a great segue into the first everyday item that you'd be silly not to keep in your filmmaking kit: paracord. If you need to attach something to something else, there's really no better bang for the buck option out there than paracord. You can lash down a tripod to a bag, you can rig a safety line for a car mount or a light, you can tie down diffusion fabrics or wrap it around a bat scientist's waist to hold a snorri cam in place. Just learn how to tie 2 knots, a bowline, which gives you a strong loop, and then a hitch knot, which lets you lash things in place, and you can do pretty much anything with paracord. And there's definitely fancier, more specialized knots out there that professional grips use, but with just those 2, you can solve like 90% of rigging problems. You can get 30 meters or like 100 feet of paracord for well under $20, and pretty much every army surplus store in the world will carry it if you don't like Amazon. And it weighs pretty much nothing, so just drop it in the bottom of one of your bags, and it's amazing how often you'll find yourself cutting off little sections to help you out of a jam. Now, a little more recently, on a shoot in Arizona in the desert near the Mexican border, I had to do a really long off-grid hike with a search and rescue group, and weight was a huge issue. Like, if you've ever tried to walk for even an hour holding a camera in your hand by the top handle, you'll know just how tiring that can get. But I did want to shoot at a really high quality, so there was only so much I could do to strip my FX9 back without compromising the functionality. But even though I got it pretty light, I still needed to get the weight out of my hands if I was going to keep up with the rest of the group. I had a pretty lightweight camera strap. Actually, it was an old rock climbing strap, but even that has to kind of go around your neck and shoulder, and no matter how many ways I've tried, straps always seem to chafe like right here at the end of a long day. So I knew I wanted to get the rig attached in another way, and having done this a bunch of times before, I knew the best place to anchor it was right here to the shoulder strap of my bag. Hanging the weight from here takes all the pressure off your neck, but still, the problem is if it's tied there, you can't get the camera off the shoulder strap, so you don't have full freedom of movement. And as useful as those 2 knots I just mentioned are, they're too slow to untie. So I had to bring in the next cheap item from our list: carabiners. You know what these things are? They're for rock climbing, but they're so helpful for run and gun filmmakers too, especially when you team them up with our old buddy paracord. From lashing bags onto the roofs of vehicles, or hanging lights in trees, or food bags in bear country for that matter, to replacing my camera strap like I did in the desert, I use these things in too many different ways to list here. But literally every backpack I own has at least one of them hanging off. They're super cheap, and if you spend a little more and get the good ones that are actually rated for climbing, you can hang insane amounts of weight off them without worrying. Okay, so Carabiners and paracord are great, but what about when you need to attach things to your camera rig? Like you can't exactly lash a lav mic to the back of your battery or dangle a timecode box off a carabiner. For a monitor or something big, maybe you'd use a friction arm or something similar, but those are too heavy to use for all the little bits and pieces you need to get on your rig sometime. Like I'm not gonna use a 1-pound arm to attach a tiny weightless timecode box. It just doesn't make any sense. So how do pros deal with this? Well, in my case, it's with the most low-tech piece of gear out there, Velcro. Double-sided industrial Velcro tape to be more specific. If you take a look at my cameras, both my FX9 and my FX3 have Velcro all over them. It's on the back of all my V-mount batteries, it's on the audio top handle, both the front and the back on my FX3, it's even on the cheese plate of my FX9, anywhere I have flat space really. You just put the soft side on the camera and the hard side or the hook side on the accessory, then you can really easily get things on and off your rig really fast. My standard FX9 setup is the lav receiver Velcroed to the back of my V-mount batteries and then the timecode box Velcroed to the top. And no matter how much money I spent on little arms and stuff over the years, I don't think I'd be able to find a better solution. Like I'm not even sure how I'd mount a lav and a timecode box to my FX3 without it unless I wanted to have stuff like sticking up all over the place and just getting in the way. Just get a small roll of 2-inch double-sided tape and cut off tiny bits as needed and it's gonna last you a really long time. Insanely handy. Okay, moving on to the next everyday item I keep in my kit at all times is all about audio. Like I already touched on with paracord, getting things to stick to other things is a situation I run into on pretty much every shoot. But sometimes you need a slightly more subtle tool than military grade rope. The big one that jumps to mind for me is for audio, more specifically when you need to attach lav mics to your characters, but don't want to clip them on the outside of someone's clothes like they're a news anchor. And even worse in my opinion, the dreaded DJI clip-on mic that's taken over YouTube, but I don't think mics should show in verite filmmaking ever, so maybe I'm a bit of a snob. And obviously we can't tie the mics to them, so we need to stick them to them, usually directly to the skin. And most people don't want industrial Velcro on their skin either, so we're out of options there. If you're a member of my documentary cinematography course, you might have already heard the conversation with the professional sound guy where he explains the best place to position your mics, like right at the center of this rough triangle between your neck and your chest. So you might even think about using gaffer tape here, but gaff tape tends to slip when skin gets hot and sweaty, so we do need another solution. Luckily, the solution is super cheap and easy, and you don't need to go to B&H to find it. And that's medical tape. This stuff is especially designed to stick to skin no matter how sweaty it gets, and most of the time I just feed the mic into one of those stupidly overpriced rubber squares I showed you, then I'll put a strip of tape across it and then stick that directly onto the character's chest, right about here. I've done this hundreds, if not thousands of times, and it's pretty rare that it fails or falls off. A roll of this stuff costs less than $5 on Amazon or at any pharmacy, and I always keep some with my audio gear. You can add complexity to this by using snot tape or toupee tape to add a layer of cushioning between the medical tape and the mic, but honestly, just the tape on its own will get you 90% of the way there, and it only takes a couple seconds to set up. It's perfect for the small crew who needs to work fast, like I do so often. So that's great for securing mics in place, but what if we need to protect the transmitter itself? Like if it's raining or snowing, we can't just stop shooting because we're afraid of frying our kits, so we need to find a way to protect our gear that's fast to put on and doesn't create a lot of extra bulk. I've tried this with little Ziploc bags and even saran wrap, but while these things keep the packs dry, they do make them really hard to access to change batteries, and they create unwanted noise as they crinkle around in people's pockets. So what's the answer? Well, most of the time, my go-to solution is a condom. Now you might get some weird looks pulling them out on set, so maybe don't store them in your wallet if you don't want to creep everybody out, but they're the perfect solution to this problem. They're waterproof, they stretch, and they'll wrap around the shape of the lav pack perfectly. Now there's definitely some dirty jokes to make here. The one that comes to mind is something about practicing safe sets. But let's all try and be adults for this one because they're just such a great hack for this very specific filmmaking issue. To be honest, decent lav packs are pretty water resistant, and it's rarely raining so hard that I'm worried about ruining them. For that odd time when I need to shoot audio in a downpour, a condom is my best friend. I usually buy the largest size available just to make sure I don't rip them while I'm stretching them around the mic, and we'll just leave it at that. Absolutely no follow-up jokes to be made there. Okay, so now that we got our minds out of the gutter for a second, the next everyday item I like to keep tape around is basically a beefed up version of something most elementary school students will recognize from craft time. Like, let's say you need to mount a small light to the bottom of a bookshelf, like right back here. Or maybe you want to fix a GoPro to the dash of a car, or maybe you're even trying to hang gels from the ceiling to cover an existing light that you don't really like the color of. We could use tape, but that runs the risk of ripping the paint off whatever you attach it to. Or if the paint isn't so much of an issue, the other problem with tape is that there are all sorts of surfaces it doesn't like to stick to. Anything cold, for example, like a car hood in the winter, or anything rough like a brick wall. Even the stronger gaffer tape is going to struggle to stick to this stuff. The answer is this stuff, industrial grade adhesive putty. As long as whatever you need to stick isn't really heavy, this stuff is gonna stick to a lot of surfaces without damaging anything. And you can fit it into all sorts of small cracks where tape just wouldn't work. I think the weight limit on this particular brand is 2 pounds, but that's more than enough to make it useful. Like a GoPro or an Aperture MC light like this weigh a lot less than that, and that's the kind of thing I'd be most likely trying to hide in weird places anyways. Like, you can see here, if I just stick 4 pieces of this stuff onto the back of this tiny light, say I want to get it under this shelf, just push it down, and that's not going to go anywhere. There is also a filmmaking specific version of this stuff called Black Tack, which I'll link to in the description. It's essentially the same thing, but quite a bit more expensive and a fair bit stronger as well. So if you really want to go hard with this, that's your best bet. But this everyday version of it works really well in most situations. Putty or tack or whatever you want to call it is cheap, it's reusable, it's moldable, and I've used it to rig up to 9 GoPros to a car everywhere from the dashboard to the front grille, and we drove around with it all day without them budging. Try Black Tack if you want to be extra sure, but for how cheap this stuff is, there's no reason not to keep some of it around. Okay, so let's change gears here and finish this video off with my 2 favorite everyday lighting accessories, things that I always bring with me and see a ton of action. The first is for diffusing light and the second is for cutting it, and both can be found on Amazon for really cheap. In fact, you probably already own both of these things, but I'm just going to come out and say what the first one is because we've talked about it so much on this channel already that it might not be a surprise at this point, and that's a shower curtain. A frosted white shower curtain to be exact. Now, I don't have mine in hand right now because it's in my storage locker with the rest of my lighting gear, but this is just such a great stand-in for super expensive pieces of diffusion fabric, and mine has bailed me out of so many tough situations. You can hang it off a C-stand to make a big softbox, or maybe a book light for interviews. You can tape it up over windows to bring down the harsh glare coming into a room. You could even use it as a giant bounce or a poor man's cove light setup. I'm not saying it's better than a 6x6 piece of grid cloth or muslin because it's probably not if you pixel peek, but it's about 10% of the price of professional fabrics, and that means you can afford to be a lot rougher with them. Or if you already have pro diffusion fabric, why not just chuck an extra shower curtain in the bottom of your bag anyways, just in case. Shower curtains are one of the best value to use ratios of anything I have in my kit, and it's just a no-brainer to have one yourself. So that's great for diffusing lights, but what if you need to cut light instead of just modifying it? Like, what if you get to an interview location and it's just so full of light that there's no definition to your frame and your key light can't overpower the ambient source? Or on a big set, you might call in the grips to rig huge pieces of duvetine or set up some big frames with full black cloth on them, but smaller run and gun productions don't usually have that kind of crew on hand. So what do? Well, the answer is easy. Just use garbage bags. Garbage bags are amazing at cutting light, and if you need to block out a window fast, just open them up and slit them lengthwise and tape them over the glass. You're not going to win any awards for elegance here, but who really cares if it's doing the job? From skylights to floor-to-ceiling windows, a few ordinary garbage bags can cover them all super quickly and allow you to take back control of the light in your shooting space. Plus, if it starts pouring rain, you can hide your gear inside them in a pinch. I typically keep 2 garbage bags around when I travel, but the good news is that they're so common most of the time, you can just find them sitting under the sink in your hotel or your shooting location. They're everywhere. These are priced in the cents per unit, not dollars. And at the end of the day, when you're done, you can just pull it down and use it to clean up the garbage on set before you leave. It doesn't get any easier or cheaper than that. So there we go, 8 everyday items that pro filmmakers love. Using limited resources to get maximum results is one of the things I love most about documentary filmmaking, and it's a job that's as much about creative problem solving as it is technical mastery. For me anyways, that's a big part of the fun, and while traveling and meeting people and learning about the world are all big draws, there's something about trying to figure out how to get that weird shot you have in mind using whatever random gack you have on hand that's just so satisfying. Hopefully that gave you some ideas on how you can expand your kit without spending a ton of cash, and who knows, you probably already have some of this stuff laying around. Win-win. See ya. Still stuck.